With just over 5 weeks to go before the UK hosts the most important climate conference in a generation, Boris Johnson came to the UN last night with an urgent, sombre message.
My friends, the adolescence of humanity is coming to an end and must come to an end. We're approaching that critical turning point when we must show that we are capable of learning and maturing and finally taking responsibility for the destruction we are inflicting, not just upon our planet, but upon ourselves. It's time for humanity to grow up.
With wildfires burning from America to Europe and unprecedented extreme weather across the globe, the Prime Minister, once a climate skeptic, insisted the planet could soon be uninhabitable.
Oh, that proof is coming.
Unless everyone comes to COP26 in Glasgow, armed with their most ambitious plans yet to cut emissions.
And the tragedy is that because of our past inaction, there are further rises in temperatures that are already baked in, not because of some unforeseen natural event or disaster, but because of us, because of what we are doing now. And our grandchildren will know that we are the culprits, and they will know that we knew.
He's determined Glasgow won't be a rehash of the Paris Agreement in 2015. No doubting the joy at the time, but the targets 6 years on are nowhere close to being achieved. The planet is already 1.2 degrees hotter than pre-industrial times, but to avoid going over the critical target of 1.5 degrees agreed in Paris, global carbon emissions will have to drastically decrease. The problem is they're continuing to rise. And as economies reopen post-COVID, a dangerous surge is expected, which could blow the targets altogether. Of course, any climate target will have zero chance of being achieved unless America, the world's second biggest polluter, is on board. Away from his diplomatic spat with France, Joe Biden reiterated his some say overly ambitious target to cut US emissions in half by the end of the decade.
And the scientists and experts are telling us that we're fast approaching a point of no return in a literal sense.
Hence the timing when the president sat down with Boris Johnson of a new pledge to double America's climate funding for developing nations to more than $11 billion annually. A win for the Prime Minister, who'd been urging leaders to commit more money ahead of Glasgow. But it's not yet clear if the world's biggest emitter, China, will even attend the conference. Though there was this big concession that China would end support for new coal-fired power plants abroad, even as it continues to build them inside China, adding millions of tons of carbon a year. Nor has Beijing submitted its formal climate plan ahead of COP26 in November. Neither has India. Brazil has, but it's already being criticised as too little. Is it any wonder that rather than halving global emissions by 2030, the current trajectory is for them to rise by nearly 20% instead? Well, Joe Biden's climate targets are all well and good, but it's worth noting that much of the funding and initiatives around climate are all wrapped up in his mega infrastructure bill, which is currently passing through Congress. And given the bitter divide of politics here in America, that bill has had to be split into two. On the one hand, which the Republicans back, is the funding of basic roads, bridges, tunnels, etc., which means all the climate initiative has gone into the other half, which in theory only needs to pass through the Senate, where the Democrats have a very, very slim majority. But even here, the Democrats can't agree on the passage of this bill. On the one hand, you have the moderates like Joe Manchin, who thinks that the climate initiatives are too big, too bold, need to be cut back from that bill. While on the other, you have the Democratic progressives who think that the climate ambitions are not ambitious enough, and they are looking to make them even bigger. All of which is to say that unless these two bills pass Congress at the moment, and that is looking very dicey, that Joe Biden's climate initiatives, unfortunately, are by no means close to being passed.
Siobhan Kennedy, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now from Cambridge is Sir David King, Chair of the Climate Crisis Advisory Group, which provides analysis of global warming by independent scientists from across the globe. Thanks very much for coming on the programme, Sir David. When the Prime Minister calls on the world essentially to grow up, is he in a position to actually do that?
Well, I think the Prime Minister made a very interesting Boris Johnson style speech. I don't think anyone else in the world could have delivered a speech of that kind. And I'm not going to go into the detail. I think what I do want to say, however, is that for very many years, beginning with Blair, I think there has been some maturity in Britain in some areas, beginning with Blair and Brown, but continuing through the Cameron and May period. We've had all-party agreement on action on climate change. We actually have led the world for many years. And we have had our Prime Minister previously at the G7 meeting promised to reduce our emissions by 78% by 2035. Where did he get the figure from? From the Climate Change Committee of Parliament. And how well or badly has the Prime Minister scored according to the Climate Change Committee of Parliament, who have reported back to the Prime Minister saying, actually, you're not meeting those targets that you are now promising to deliver. So the government itself needs to take very, very severe actions to see, and good actions to see that we meet these challenges ourselves. I think he is speaking up, action on climate change, and I very much welcome that. But I think beyond speaking up, actions need to follow. But let me just say, if I may,
so are you
Matt,
saying that go on.
That there is now an opportunity for the US, China, the European Union, and the United Kingdom, we're in the presidency, to provide a coherent leadership, to provide a strategy to manage the climate crisis at COP26. We've never before been in this position to have the United States and China in that leadership group. What we must avoid doing is batting away at China and saying, you're not doing enough. I don't think any country in the world is doing more than China is doing to defossilize its economy.
Seriously?
Seriously. I think if I look at the renewable energy and nuclear energy program that they have already installed, it's more than the rest of the world put together. And I am very serious about this. I am in close contact and have been with many different governments in the world. And I can tell you that I believe China is going to deliver on its promises on defossilization. But I do want to say, just remember, when the economy of a country is growing at 6 to 8% a year, that means energy demands are going up in line with the development of the new middle class in that country. And to meet the energy demands, very, very difficult to switch over to renewables and nuclear as quickly as they can. They are doing it, and I know that the focus is very strong. Now I'm going to ask, please tell me, how much is the United States able to deliver? Now, we've just heard, and this has been the situation with the United States, there has never been congressional approval of all the actions required for the United States to take on climate change. And yet the United States, in the past, since 1945, has been in the leadership position on almost every single global agreement. We haven't seen that agreement now, and that is really why we're in the position we're in. It's very challenging.
And of course, we've got midterm elections coming up in America next year, which could yet again overturn the political reality there. But if you look at the COP26 targets, are we at all in a position to actually meet them? I'm not just talking about our country, but about, the big players here, China and the United States, of course.
At COP26, we need to hear about an agreement to end the use of coal, oil, and gas in an orderly, efficient, rapid, and fair way. We need to see that agreement alongside an agreement to fund, to meet the commitment made in 2010 to provide a fund of $100 billion a year to help developing countries achieve the objectives set out there. But we also need, and I know there's nobody talking about this yet, but the Climate Crisis Advisory Group is very clear about this. We've put too much in the way of greenhouse gases up there already. The latest report from the Intergovernmental Panel clearly states that the melting of ice on land around the world is now occurring irreversibly. And that means sea levels will eventually rise by 20 meters. That's not a safe future for humanity. So we need to see that we develop methods to remove greenhouse gases. We put too much up there already. And we also quickly need to refreeze the Arctic, where most of these problems have begun.
Okay, all right. Got to leave it there, I'm afraid. So, David King, thank you very much indeed.